Warning, the following review contains a crapload of spoilers from The Amazing Spider-Man 2. If you haven't seen the movie yet and you care about being spoiled, please go see the film first and then come back to listen to the review. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 had a lot of mixed feelings about it long before it was released. Fans were really worried about how the film would tackle three villains after Spider-Man 3 failed doing that. Thankfully, villain overload is not one of this film's problems. While The Amazing Spider-Man 2 has a decent beginning and a heart-wrenching climax, there are a few issues with the middle of the film that keep it from being truly amazing. And the end result is a film that I didn't necessarily hate, but I was incredibly disappointed in. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 kicks things off with showing more of the mystery behind why Peter's parents left him with Aunt May and Uncle Ben. It's a pretty good opening scene, though I feel like this should have been shown in the first movie. The scene is then followed by Spider-Man chasing Alexei Skavezis, better known as the Rhino. The action then slows down as we see Peter dealing with seeing the ghost of Gwen Stacy's father, Captain Stacy, which is starting to make him reconsider dating Gwen. However, Gwen is sick of Peter deciding whether he should or shouldn't be with her, and so she dumps him. It's a bit of a disappointment to see Peter and Gwen split, since at the end of the first movie, it seemed like Peter wasn't planning on listening to Gwen's father. It's at this point that the film then introduces us to Max Dillon, aka Electro, and my first real issue with the movie. I just didn't like the way the Max Dillon character was set up at all. I like Jamie Foxx, who was clearly doing his best with the material he was given, but still. The whole Max Dillon is a Spider-Man stalker is just too weird and plain creepy. I understand what the writers were going for, trying to make Max look like a loner and having him have conversations with himself and make him over-idolize Spider-Man so that when he becomes Electro he can hate him. But the problem is, I just never felt any sympathy for him. I mean, I spent most of his early scenes just cringing. The only time I really felt bad for him was when he became Electro and he couldn't control his powers in Times Square and Spider-Man was trying to help him. I mean, the best way they could have fixed Max's character would have been to remove this crazy obsession with Spider-Man, and also that bad comb-over and teeth, which just looked way too cliche for its own good. Instead, have Max admire Spider-Man, just not in the obsessive sense. I mean, perhaps have Max live with his father, who believes Max is a failure for working at Oscorp as an electrician. This would have tied in better during the end when Harry comes to make the alliance with him, since they both would have come from fathers that didn't respect them. And then when Max becomes Electro, he can kill his father by accident when he uses his anger to set off his powers. And then you can have the scene in Times Square, and the rest of the movie can continue as it is. And if you're still worried about creating sympathy for Max, how about doing what the Spectacular Spider-Man TV show did with the character? I mean, there Max has a similar accident to what happens in the movie, though once he becomes Electro, you can see that all he wants to do is just return to his normal life and can't. A simple trip to a coffee shop turns into a nightmare for Max, and he eventually goes crazy because of it. I had more sympathy for this animated character than I did for the flesh and blood one. The other villain is clearly Harry Osborn as the Green Goblin, and Dane DeHaan is great to watch on screen, and he and Andrew Garfield have some pretty good scenes together. DeHaan is a particular treat to watch once he starts going insane and makes his pact with Electro. And his Green Goblin, while it's not on screen for long, it does leave a pretty good impact. The only problem I really had with his character was how the film built up his friendship between him and Peter. In this version, the two were friends years ago before Harry went off to boarding school. But since Harry wasn't even mentioned in the first movie, it's a bit weird when Peter shows up to Harry's place after Norman Osborn dies. We are then only given a few minutes to establish the friendship, which again has happened mostly off screen, before the film has to then painfully switch gears and paint Harry as a villain. It probably would have been better if Harry had just been in the first film and we could have seen his friendship with Peter during one whole film, rather than have him be introduced as a friend and then turn villain all in the same movie. There would have been a lot more dramatic weight if we knew Harry longer and gotten a chance to see what good friends he and Peter were, rather than the two scenes we get in this film. And also, just a side question, why is Harry so desperate to use Spider-Man's blood exactly? I mean, Norman left him with that weird USB thing containing all the research that he did to prolong his life, and clearly, while it didn't cure him, it definitely made him live longer, since Norman almost lived 70 years with the disease. So, I mean, if Harry just follows the information that's on the USB, won't he be alright for that long too? I mean, it's not like he has a more advanced strain of the virus and he's dying quicker. I mean, he acts like he has days left. Another issue was the middle slump of the film, which has little to no action and is merely setting up the climax while also resolving the big mystery behind Peter's parents. The problem here is that midway through the film, Aunt May reveals to Peter that Oscorp executives came to the house shortly after Peter's parents died and explained to them that Richard Parker stole research and was a traitor to the company. This begins to make Peter doubt what kind of person his father was. However, no more than 20 minutes later, Peter finds Richard's ghost train and learns that his father was not a traitor and that Oscorp are the real enemies. I mean, this reveal has so little impact, because by the time Aunt May reveals the info that Richard was a traitor, most of the audience has already seen enough in both this film and the last to know that Oscorp ain't exactly the Peace Corps. So it's not a big surprise that Oscorp was really trying to use Richard's research for less than noble means. And don't get me started on the damn ghost train. I mean, so many questions. Why was it there? How did it get there? Why did Richard even bother to send his research there? Who was supposed to see this research? The most logical answer you could probably come up with is that Richard created the train station lab when he realized Oscorp couldn't be trusted and he had to continue his work in secret. I mean, this makes sense, but the film doesn't even bother to offer an explanation. And even with that explanation, it still doesn't explain just who in the hell was supposed to see this research that Richard was sending here. I mean, it couldn't have been Peter at all. I mean, Richard didn't leave clues for Peter to follow to reach the train. I mean, it's not like he told Uncle Ben and Aunt May the night he dropped Peter off, "Oh yeah, you might want to give this briefcase to Peter when he's old enough." I mean, the briefcase was just lying in the basement, and the tokens to enter the train station were hidden in the graphing calculator. I mean, how was Peter supposed to know to do any of that if it wasn't by dumb luck? My last issues with the film are probably more nitpicks than anything, but they still affected how much I enjoyed the movie. I mean, first it has to do with how much this film is setting up the next movie and the Sinister Six spin-off. I mean, there's a few nods to the Sinister Six movie with the vulture wings and Doc Ock's tentacles, and these little Easter eggs are fine. What really annoyed me was the fact that there are characters that are introduced in this film that are important to the Spider-Man lore, and yet they play no real role at all, and they're teased horribly. I mean, for example, 2 characters get introduced within the first hour, and if you're not remotely familiar with the Spider-Man comics, or even the 1994 animated series, you're gonna have no clue as to who these people are and why they're so important. The film teases us with Felicia, my last name is not yet revealed, Hardy, and Alistair, I'm another Spider-Man villain, Smythe. Felicia eventually goes on to become the Black Cat, and a love interest for Spider-Man, and Smythe eventually goes on to create the Spider Slayers, and eventually becomes the Ultimate One. However, they have no reason to be here other than to potentially tease the next film. I mean, the only character the film teases well is Paul Giamatti's Rhino, because we see him at the beginning for the first action scene, and then again decked out in the awesome Rhino suit, even though the trailers made it seem like Rhino was more important. I mean, seriously, if you watched any of these trailers, then you've seen every bit of footage of Paul Giamatti. Hell, you even saw the final shot to the film, just by watching the third trailer. I mean, I would have been completely fine with Felicia and Smythe in this film if there was some cool tease about who they become later on, but there's nothing. I mean, how about having Felicia sneaking around Oscorp looking for something associated with her Black Cat persona? Or how about having Smythe look over designs for the Spider Slayers? This would at least clue in the audience members who don't know who these characters are and would make them become interested in seeing them again. And also, I hated the damn scene where Peter had to look online to find out how to make his web shooters immune to Electro's blast. I mean, clearly the writers of this film do not get the Peter Parker character at all. Peter was smart enough to build his own web shooters in the first movie by himself. I mean, he would be able to figure out that he would have to magnetize them in order to make them impervious to Electro's blast without help online or even help from Gwen. And speaking of Gwen, it's here where I have to give Mark Webb and his team a lot of respect and credit for following the comic books and killing Gwen off. I mean, this couldn't have been an easy decision, what with all the fans loving Emma Stone's portrayal of Gwen and there being more films in this series planned. I mean, I do envy the people who saw this movie and had no idea that this was coming, the few people that there were. Any true Spider-Man fan knew that Gwen was going to bite the dust right when we all saw the Green Goblin in the teaser posters, and it was all pretty much but confirmed when the set pictures of Gwen wearing her iconic blue jacket were released. It probably also didn't help that the TV spots released in the last couple of weeks before the film came out showed way too much of the film's end sequences with Gwen and the Goblin, so that even if you were a non-Spider-Man comic fan, you still probably could have pieced together what was going to happen. I mean, seriously, they should have just not even told us the Green Goblin was in this movie. Make it a big surprise. This way everyone could have been shocked at the exact same time. But nope, they spent so much money showing all these posters and trailers and clips about the Green Goblin, so it was all completely spoiled months before we all saw the film. I mean, despite me knowing how the film was going to end, the ending still was a very emotional scene, and Garfield did a really great job here, and I really did like the way the film handled the aftermath. I mean, rather than having just Peter spend time in his room acting all depressed and not seeing anybody, I mean, all we see is him simply visiting Gwen's grave multiple times. I mean, it says so much by saying nothing at all. I'm really going to miss Emma Stone, but you know, here's hoping for flashbacks in The Amazing Spider-Man 3. Just please, whoever writes the next movie, don't do clones. We don't need a Gwen Stacy clone. I don't know how they would even handle that, but please, no clones. I also felt like in Spider-Man 3, this film had a message that it wanted to get across, but it somehow got tangled up in all of the other plot points and other developments. I mean, there's a message here about what Spider-Man means to the people of New York and how he stands for hope, and the last scene of the film when we see Peter returning as Spider-Man clearly illustrates that point. It's just sort of a shame that the rest of the film is too busy setting up villains, spin-off information, and backstory to show us more of this point. And this is where adding the Daily Bugle to the film would have been perfect. I mean, first off, I'm appalled that the film chose to have Peter working at the Daily Bugle completely off screen. I mean, Peter's job there is paramount to the whole Spider-Man story, and yet it's treated here as if it's nothing. It's not even like the film is saying, oh, Peter's just trying to get work at the Bugle. Nope, he works there already. He's met Jonah Jameson already. I mean, if you're going to do this, why the hell bother introducing Mary Jane in the next movie? Why don't we just have Peter date her off screen? She's not important, no more important than the Daily Bugle would be. I mean, if the film had used the Daily Bugle, it would have fit in perfectly. I mean, it would have been perfect. They could have had Jameson smearing Spider-Man's actions as usual, and it would cause Peter to doubt whether he truly is a hero or a menace like Jameson says he is, and he could debate between whether he should still be Spider-Man or live a normal life with Gwen, one that would free her from any harm. I mean, if scenes like this were present, it could have made the ending of the film all the more meaningful, instead of just using the message of the film of hope as a way to get Peter back to becoming Spider-Man. In regards to the other things paramount to the Spider-Man story, also, what happened with Uncle Ben's killer? You know, the killer that Peter didn't catch in the first movie? The one that got away? I mean, Uncle Ben gets one mention in the entire film, and he's never mentioned again. I mean, they don't even mention the fact that Uncle Ben's killer is still at large, or where he is now, or if there's been any sort of improvement on that search. I mean, even when Peter is building his plot picture outline on his wall, the wanted poster from the first movie isn't there. It's gone. I mean, does Peter not care about catching his uncle's killer? I mean, again, the film is just so busy setting up all of these future plot lines in these future movies that it can't even address the plot lines that it introduced in the last movie. In the end, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 cares more about setting up for its future films and spin-offs. I mean, the writers don't care how they set up specific events and characters, just as long as they get established. Harry's friendship with Peter is half-assed, but who cares, because we need the Green Goblin. Max Dillon's character is a walking cliche, but who cares, because we need Electro. Look, it's great to want to expand a universe or lay the groundwork for future installments, but a film should care about the story it's trying to tell now, and not 2 movies from now. I mean, it's kind of like what happened with Iron Man 2. That movie was more concerned with setting up the Avengers that it couldn't devote time to its personal story, and it suffered for it. I also feel like the film is trying so hard now not to be like the Sam Raimi's film, so that's why we can't see certain things like the Daily Bugle or Jameson, Mary Jane, or even Norman Osborn. And as for killing Osborn off in this film, yeah, the writers better fix this fast, since there's only one real Green Goblin, and that's Norman Osborn. So yeah, get your shit together and fix that. I mean, the first film was a decent start, but now this film has greatly damaged the structure for this reboot series. I'm already worried about the next movie because we already have the Rhino and Green Goblin set up, and there's probably going to be another villain in addition to more teases for the Sinister Six movie and the Venom spin-off. So, I mean, if all that teasing for future movies didn't work so well here, don't have that much hope for the next installment. Overall, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 has a few good moments, and it has a pretty good action-packed ending, but the setups for the villains are so weak, and the middle of the film suffers from an unsatisfying reveal regarding Peter's parents. The film is a misstep for the series, and hopefully the next film will be more focused on telling a great story and care a lot less about setting up future movies in this franchise.